B.B. King challenged Jimmy to make one note cry like it had a soul. What happened next changed how the world understood blues forever. April 12th, 1968, Fillmore West, San Francisco. Something profound was about to happen in a cramped backstage area that smelled of decades of musical history. B.B. King was 42 years old and undisputed royalty in the blues world. For 2 decades, he'd been teaching people what the guitar could do when played with soul instead of speed. When B.B. touched Lucille, his beloved Gibson ES-355, something transcendent happened. Pure, honest, emotional magic. He'd earned his crown through years of Chitlin circuit tours, playing for audiences who didn't tolerate pretense. B.B. had survived it all, distilling 20 years of musical truth into every note he played. Jimi Hendrix was there that night, sitting third row with friends from the San Francisco music scene. At 25, he was already being called a guitar god, but he had deep respect for the blues legends who had paved his road. Backstage, 2 hours before showtime, B.B. was deep in his pre-performance ritual. He sat alone with Lucille, playing scales, preparing his mind. This was sacred time. The road crew knew it. Even Bill Graham knew never to disturb B.B. during these precious moments. But Noel Redding, Jimmy's bass player, didn't know the rule. "Excuse me, Mr. King. Sorry to bother you, but Jimi Hendrix is out front tonight, and he'd love to meet you." B.B. looked up slowly. He'd heard about this Hendrix character, the loud, flashy player who set guitars on fire, the showman who made teenage crowds scream with volume and effects. "Hendrix," B.B. said quietly. He'd seen some footage, heard the records. Impressive technical ability, but all that flash, all that noise. Where was the soul? "Yes, sir. He's got tremendous respect for you. Says you're one of his biggest influences." B.B. considered this. Maybe it was time to see what this young sensation was really made of. "Bring him back, then. Just for a few minutes." 10 minutes later, Jimmy was standing backstage. The space was cluttered with guitar cases, amplifiers, and road cases. Cables snaked across the floor. The walls were covered with posters from past shows. Musical history pasted on top of itself. Jimmy was dressed in his signature style, purple velvet jacket over bell-bottom jeans, his afro perfectly shaped. But despite the flamboyant clothes, he carried himself with almost shy dignity. This wasn't the wild man from the stage. "Mr. King," Jimmy said, extending his hand with a slight bow, "this is truly an honor. I've been listening to your records since I was 16. B.B. shook the offered hand firmly, studying the younger man's face. Jimmy's eyes were gentle, intelligent. This wasn't what the blues master had anticipated. "Call me B.B., son. I've been hearing quite a lot about you lately." "All good things, I hope," Jimmy replied with a soft smile. B.B. returned the smile, but there was something measuring in it. "Well now, that depends entirely on who's doing the talking." Word was spreading that something significant was happening. Other musicians and roadies began gathering around, sensing the electricity between two masters. "I caught some footage of you performing in London," B.B. said, settling back with Lucille. "Quite energetic." "Thank you, sir. But I learned more watching that old film of you at the Apollo. The way you make Lucille sing, that's what I've been trying to understand." B.B. raised an eyebrow. Most young rock players wanted to discuss amplifiers and effects. This one was talking about emotional expression. "Is that right?" B.B. started fingering a slow blues progression. "And what exactly did you learn?" Jimmy listened intently, focusing on the subtle way B.B. bent each note. "That space matters as much as sound," Jimmy said thoughtfully. "That silence can be louder than any amplifier. That every single note has to earn its place by saying something true." B.B. stopped playing and looked at Jimmy with new interest. Maybe this young man understood more than the critics gave him credit for. "Now that's interesting, because from what I've been hearing, you play loud and fast, use electronic effects, put on quite a theatrical show. All flash and fireworks, some folks say." The backstage area grew quieter. This wasn't casual conversation anymore. This was a test. Jimmy didn't flinch at the implicit criticism. He'd heard it before from blues purists. "Some folks might say that," Jimmy replied calmly. "But I think maybe they're listening to the wrong things." "Oh? And what should they be listening to?" "The same thing you listen for, B.B. The feeling behind the notes. The truth trying to get out." It doesn't matter if that truth comes through a beat-up acoustic or a Stratocaster through Marshall amplifiers. If there's no genuine feeling, there's no real music. BB nodded slowly. This young man wasn't just defending his style, he was articulating a philosophy. Feeling, BB repeated. That's the right word. But here's what I wonder, son. Anyone can turn amplifiers up loud enough to make people feel something. But can you make them feel something deep? Something that stays with them after the last note fades? Jimmy was quiet, understanding he was being challenged. I don't know, he said honestly. I try to. Every time I pick up a guitar, I try to find something real to say. But I don't know if I always succeed. Well, trying and actually doing are different things. BB's voice carried the authority of 2 decades in the business. I've heard your records, seen footage from London. You play loud and fast, crowds love it. But let me ask you something specific. Can you make one note cry like it's got a soul? The question hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Everyone backstage went completely silent. It was a challenge, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent 20 years proving that sometimes less was infinitely more powerful. Jimmy didn't respond immediately. He looked at BB's weathered face, then down at Lucille, then back. Something flickered in his expression. I don't know, Jimmy said softly. I've never really tried to do it that way. Not like you do. BB smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the expression of a master craftsman who'd found the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the difference between technique and artistry. Well then, want to find out if you can? Without waiting for an answer, BB unplugged Lucille and held her out toward Jimmy. The entire backstage area went dead silent. Everyone knew what this meant. BB King never let anyone else play Lucille. Ever. You're serious? Jimmy asked, eyes wide with surprise. Dead serious. Take her. Jimmy accepted the guitar with reverence. Lucille was heavier than his Stratocaster, her hollow body warm from BB's hands. No amplifier, BB said firmly. No effects pedals. No reverb. No distortion. No volume to hide behind. Just the guitar. Just your hands. Just whatever truth you can find inside yourself. The challenge was clear. Strip away all the tools that modern rock guitarists relied on. Just the most basic relationship between human being and six strings. Jimmy sat down carefully on a road case, cradling Lucille with gentle attention. He spent a moment getting familiar with her feel, her wider neck, her higher action. The room watched in respectful silence. Everyone frozen, understanding they were about to witness something rare. Jimmy closed his eyes for several heartbeats, centering himself. When he opened them again, his demeanor had transformed. The polite young man was gone, replaced by someone deeper, more focused. This was the Jimmy that only his closest companions ever saw. Not the showman, but the seeker. He placed a single finger on the 14th fret of Lucille's G string and slowly, deliberately bent it up to a perfect B-flat. One note. Clean, pure, completely unadorned. But it wasn't just a note, it was the beginning of a conversation. Jimmy held that B-flat for what felt like 10 eternal seconds, letting it ring through Lucille's hollow body. The note seemed to hang like a question mark, like someone asking something profound and waiting for the universe to respond. Then he began to work with it, to sculpt it, to make it breathe. His vibrato was completely different from BB's. Where BB's was rapid and intense, Jimmy's was slower, wider, more oceanic, like waves rolling in from distant shores. The note began to change character, transforming from simple sound into something approaching human speech. First, it carried uncertainty, like someone asking something they weren't sure they wanted answered. Then it became more insistent, more pleading, reaching desperately for something just beyond grasp. Jimmy's face was completely absorbed, eyes closed, lost in the sound he was creating. This wasn't performance. This was meditation, prayer, communion with something larger than himself. He let the note fade to silence, then found it again on the same fret, but now it carried different emotional weight. This time it sounded like memory itself, like someone looking back at something simultaneously beautiful and painful, joy and loss intertwined. B.B. King stood motionless, watching Jimmy's hands, listening to his own guitar speak in a voice he'd never heard before. This wasn't imitation. This was something entirely original. The backstage area had become a cathedral. People held their breath, afraid to interrupt whatever communion was taking place between this young musician and that old guitar. Jimmy moved the note up one half step, from B flat to a perfect B natural, and held it there for an eternity. This note carried a completely different signature. Where the B flat had been questioning and searching, the B was acceptance. Peace. The sound of someone who had traveled through confusion and emerged with something valuable. The way he finally released that note was almost unbearable. Instead of simply lifting his finger, he gradually reduced pressure, allowing the note to fade with infinite slowness while maintaining just enough contact to guide its decay. When the last vibration faded, the backstage area remained quiet for what felt like minutes. No one wanted to be the first to speak, to break whatever spell had been cast. B.B. King looked at Jimmy, then at his guitar, then back. His face showed a complicated mixture of amazement, respect, and something deeper, recognition that he'd just learned something important about his own instrument. That, B.B. started, then stopped, his voice rougher than usual. He tried again. That was... But he couldn't complete the sentence. Jimmy carefully handed Lucille back to B.B., treating her with ceremonial respect. His hands were trembling slightly, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," Jimmy said quietly. "She's so beautiful. She has so much to say." B.B. took his guitar back and held her for a long moment, like someone reacquainting himself with an old friend who just revealed a secret that changed everything. When he looked up at Jimmy, something fundamental had shifted. "Where did you learn to play like that?" B.B. asked, barely above a whisper. "That wasn't technique. Where did that come from?" "I don't know," Jimmy replied honestly. "I just listened. Listened to what she wanted to say, tried to help her say it." The show that night was different from any B.B. King performance that longtime fans could remember. He played with an intensity that surprised even musicians who'd known his work for decades. During his slow blues numbers, there was something new in his approach, something deeper, more questioning. After the final encore, B.B. sought out Jimmy and invited him back to his hotel room, where they spent the night in conversation about music, about blues, about the difference between technical ability and authentic expression. "I was testing you tonight," B.B. admitted as dawn light filtered through the windows. "I wanted to see if you were all flash and fireworks. I wanted to prove that real blues couldn't be learned from records, that it had to be lived, experienced, earned through years of genuine suffering." Jimmy nodded, understanding the deeper currents beneath their encounter. "And what did you learn?" Jimmy asked gently. B.B. was quiet for a long time. "I learned that soul doesn't care how old you are or where you come from," he finally said. "I learned that you can't judge the depth of a man's musical heart by the volume of his amplifiers. And maybe most importantly, I learned that I've been thinking about blues too narrowly." 20 years later, in 1987, B.B. King was interviewed by Rolling Stone about his long career and young guitarists who had impressed him. "There was this one night that I'll never forget," B.B. said, his voice distant with memory. "April 1968, Fillmore West in San Francisco. Jimi Hendrix came backstage before my show, and I challenged him. I was being somewhat arrogant, I suppose. I wanted to show him what I thought real blues was supposed to sound like." "What happened?" the interviewer asked. B.B. smiled with that same complicated expression from that long-ago night backstage. He played one note on Lucille, just one single note, and in that moment I realized I'd been thinking about blues, about music itself, in ways that were far too limited. I thought blues was about paying dues, about suffering, about earning the right through years of hard experience. But Jimmy showed me that blues isn't about what you've been through. It's about how deeply you're willing to feel whatever you're feeling right now. The interviewer pressed for more details. "I had spent 20 years learning how to make Lucille cry," B.B. continued. 20 years developing my technique, my vibrato. Jimmy picked up that guitar and made her weep in 30 seconds flat. Not because he was necessarily better than me. We were different players, serving different purposes. But because he wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just being completely honest. "Did that encounter change how you approached your own playing?" BB nodded thoughtfully. That night marked the end of one phase of my career and the beginning of another. I stopped trying so hard to be the undisputed king and started trying to be more honest about what blues personally meant to me. Jimmy taught me that authenticity isn't about following established rules. It's about finding your own way to tell the truth. When Jimi Hendrix died tragically in September 1970, B.B. King was among the first to pay public tribute. At a concert in Chicago, B.B. dedicated his entire performance to the memory of the musician who had taught an old master something profound. Some people thought Jimmy was too loud, too wild, too different from traditional blues to be taken seriously, B.B. told the crowd, his voice heavy with grief. But I knew better. I heard him make one note cry like it had lived through 1,000 lifetimes. And that is the only test that really matters in music. Can you make one note tell the absolute truth about what it means to be human? The story became legendary among blues and rock musicians over the following decades. It was retold in different versions, but the essential core remained. The night B.B. King challenged Jimi Hendrix to prove himself on acoustic terms, and Jimmy responded by revealing something about blues music that even its acknowledged master hadn't fully understood. It wasn't about competition or winning and losing. It was about two masters from different generations recognizing something essential in each other across artificial boundaries. It was about understanding that musical soul doesn't respect categories, that authentic emotional truth can emerge from anywhere. B.B. King had challenged Jimi Hendrix to make one note cry like it had a soul. What happened next taught the blues king that mastery isn't about protecting your territory. Real mastery means staying open to learning and growing, even when that learning comes from someone half your age who plays music that sounds completely different from your own. That April night backstage at the Fillmore West, two legends found common ground in the space between notes, in the silence that gives music its deepest meaning. Both men walked away fundamentally changed, carrying new understanding about their craft and the infinite possibilities that exist when ego steps aside and allows pure musical truth to speak for itself.